Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I've got a really amazing episode for you today. I certainly hope so. I call this one the Venezuelan UFO Wave of 1954, Invasion of the Hairy Humanoids. Every now and then, somewhere on this planet, there's a massive wave of UFO sightings. And this is Venezuela's largest and most intense wave that they've ever experienced before or since. This follows right on the tail of the French UFO wave in October and November of 1954. This Venezuelan wave was focused mostly in December of 1954. So I have to think it's related somehow to the French wave, but I'm not sure. This is such an amazing series of events. I've collected about 40 different UFO incidents that happened largely in December, but in the months prior to it and a few after it as well. About 10 of these do involve humanoids, but really this involves almost the entire range of UFO encounters. So we see sightings, landings, face-to-face encounters with humanoids. What we don't see are onboard UFO encounters, which I'm not too surprised about because this was 1954, really prior to the time that people were reporting onboard UFO encounters. I suspect there were some, but the people did not come forward because, well, you could imagine how difficult that would be for other people to believe. But I think you'll find these events super fascinating. It's such an intense wave of activity. If you're at all educated about UFOs, you may have heard of it, but I doubt you know the whole story. So, let's get started. Most UFO waves have a few events that sort of give a hint of things to come, and that is absolutely true with this wave. So that's how I'm going to start with some of the early cases that occurred directly before this wave of activity. The first case I'd like to talk about occurred on February 3rd, 1954. It was 11:15 a.m. as Captain Dario Celis and his co-pilot BJ Cortez were approaching the city of Barquisimeto in their Aeropostal Venezuela plane. Now at the same moment, both men simultaneously noticed a rotating, top-shaped object ahead and above them. The object had a greenish tint with a red band around the midsection and brilliant portholes or perhaps lights above and below this red band. Co-pilot Cortez immediately banked the plane to try to gain on the object, while at the same time Captain Celis rushed to the passenger cabin to alert the passengers so they could see it too. And they did. At the same time, the plane's radio operator contacted Barquisimeto Field to alert authorities, but as he did so, communications went dead. The UFO immediately descended, leveled off, and moved off at tremendous speed. The plane landed 45 minutes later, where it was met by a group of reporters very eager to hear the whole story, and Captain Celis told them that prior to this incident he had not believed in UFOs. But as he says, quote, "Now, not only are we convinced of their existence, but also that they are controlled. This was the most sensational experience of my career as a pilot, and I will remember this incident forever." Turns out that same day, there was another sighting. The ocean liner Vera Cruz was off the east coast of Venezuela when the captain, crew, and many of the passengers all reported seeing a large, luminous object fly over the ship and speed off at terrific speed. Now, let's move to the next case, which occurred a few months later, and this is the first case involving humanoids of this wave. This was on April 10, 1954, and again, the first of a series of hairy humanoid encounters. The witness was Emiliano Martinez, a 27-year-old construction worker. He was returning home from a hunting trip in the hills outside of Caracas when a rustling in the bushes near the trail prompted him to stop and get his shotgun ready. The movement stopped, so he continued walking when he suddenly heard a blood-curdling, guttural scream. And in fact, it scared him so badly that he dropped his day's catch and ran for the car. He could now hear shouts behind him, and glancing back, he saw that he was being pursued by two bipedal creatures covered with dark hair. He said that they looked like a cross between a man and a monkey. So reaching his car, he fumbled for his keys, and this is when the beings attacked him from behind. One of them pulled him into a ditch and grabbed his throat. Emilino dropped his rifle and fought with this being, and as he says, I broke the beast's grip and scrambled towards the car. It was on top of me, screaming, growling, and biting like a mad animal. His rifle was now out of reach, so he grabbed a rock and smashed it on the creature's head, and this afforded him just enough time to get into his car and lock the door. The two creatures then lunged against the car, pounding against the windows. He drove off at high speed and went straight to the police to report the incident. Now the next day, he did return with some friends, and as he says, I got some of my friends and we drove back up the mountain the next morning. My new shotgun was still where I had dropped it. I tell you, senor, we were really armed. The car was filled with weapons. Now there was no sign of the creatures other than they did find some blood-stained leaves. They began to question some of the locals in the area who did tell them that recently they had seen strange disc-shaped objects, and also that cattle, sheep, pigs, dogs, and in fact 2 young farm hands had all gone missing and were never seen again. A few of the farmers did say that they had seen bristly-haired dwarves that were hiding in nearby caves. So Emilino and his friends did have the presence of mind to collect some of the blood-stained leaves, and they took them to a laboratory to have them analyzed. And according to the lab technician, Juan Valzez, he told them, and I quote, "The blood is definitely not human. It doesn't match any known animal. We are still very puzzled." So needless to say, Emilino never hunted in that area again, and as he says, I still have nightmares. I wake up screaming sometimes with a picture of those things in my mind. I hope to never see them again. So that was the first humanoid case. There's no overt UFO connection. I mean, that could very well be more like Bigfoot creatures. But some of these other cases definitely had a stronger UFO connection, like this next one, which occurred on November 4, 1954 in the Amacura Delta area. The witness was Fernando de Moya. He's 39 years old. He and 2 other men were hunting from his boat in the delta when they came upon a large spherical-shaped object floating just above the ground some distance off the shore of the river. Upon seeing it, 2 of the men who were native to the area fled in terror. But Fernando was curious, and he approached. He tied up his boat and hid behind some rocks and bushes to watch. And he saw 2, according to some sources 4, 3-foot-tall humanoids with round heads and large eyes who were running back and forth into and out of this craft. They ran by making little jumps and appeared to be collecting dirt and other things from the ground and bringing them into their craft. Suddenly, seeing that they were observed, apparently, these beings returned to their craft, which ascended vertically and disappeared. Fearing ridicule and disbelief, Fernando told nobody until later when many other people in Venezuela started to report similar experiences. These first 3 cases give a hint of all the things that were about to happen in Venezuela, but it's only just the beginning because an event was now about to happen which really electrified the whole country. And this was the beginning of this massive wave. This event occurred on November 28, 1954. You may have heard about it before. I call this one a humanoid encounter on Bella Vista Street. This was such an amazing encounter involving humanoids, and not just 2 witnesses, but dozens of witnesses saw activity on this night. So there's little doubt that something truly amazing occurred. And yeah, this was the event that really marked the beginning of the Venezuelan UFO wave. This case occurred at 2 a.m. on November 28, 1954 in Petare, Venezuela. And yeah, this occurred on Bella Vista Street. It's a very intense encounter. The main witnesses are 2 men, 25-year-old Gustavo Gonzalez and his co-worker Jose Ponce. The 2 of them were driving a truck in the area to pick up a load of food goods. As they drove their delivery van along Bella Vista Street, Now some say it's Vista Street. Either way, they were on the outskirts of Petare and came upon a glowing 6-foot wide metallic sphere, which was hovering just a few feet over the road ahead of them, actually blocking their way. And as Gustavo says, when I passed by the Bella Vista Street, driving a van which belongs to me and accompanied by a collaborator, I was surprised and suddenly stopped the vehicle I was driving when I observed that the street where we were was illuminated as if it were noon in broad daylight. My collaborator Jose Ponce, also astonished, opened the door of the van and descended to the ground. He came out running while seeing what I saw seconds later, having been able to observe an unknown living being which approached us. So they could see that this craft had 2 windows and a cupola on top. The being that they saw was hairy, very short, about 3 feet tall. They said it had a round head, large eyes, and was unclothed except for a sort of loincloth or diaper. Now the being's eyes glowed in the headlights of the truck, quote, like yellow cat's eyes. Instead of fingers, it appeared to have webbed claws. So meanwhile, Gustavo grabbed his own flashlight and hurled it at the being. It missed. So he ran up and grabbed the ET physically, trying to lift it up and carry it back into his van. He was surprised to find that the figure was quite light, but was even more surprised at how strong it was, because it easily freed itself from Gustavo's grip and literally threw him 15 feet away down onto the ground on his back. So Jose watched all of this, and then they saw 2 other figures emerge from the bushes with hunks of dirt in their hands. They all jumped into the craft. One re-emerged holding a tube-like device in its hand. Seeing this, Jose turned and ran to get help from the local police station. Meanwhile, the first figure jumped up, moved towards Gustavo. Gustavo pulled out a knife, and as the being approached, Gustavo tried to stab the creature, but he said the knife bounced off the surface of the creature. At this time, the other being shot a ray of light at Gustavo, temporarily blinding him, and the ETs immediately returned into their craft, which promptly took off. So now I'd like to read a first-hand statement from Gustavo. Keep in mind, this was originally in Portuguese and translated to English. And as Gustavo says, "At the beginning, I felt as if something prevented me from moving, but then I advanced towards where the unknown being stood. I took it between my arms and tried to stop it, but this small hombrecillo, as we would qualify it, had much force and succeeded in breaking loose from the catch of my arms which was applied to him. Although he had been raised from the ground, it weighed something like 50 kilograms, and to have tried to carry him towards the van, I fell on the pavement at this reaction. It quickly stopped me. I tried to chase the hombrecillo, and when I looked at him again, I observed more surprising things. 2 more hombrecillos came towards me, of which one of them illuminated me with a lantern, coming apparently in assistance to his companion. This light prevented me from seeing what occurred during a while, and a little time after, while being in my normal state, all had disappeared. When I left this state of, quote, trance, holding my Boy Scout knife in the right hand and realizing that the hombrecillo was to be stopped, was approaching me, by instinct, because I held up the weapon which I carried, and I struck my weapon in the shoulder of the unknown being. But my surprise was without end when the knife slipped on its hard skin, not entering in at all. He appeared to have the skin of a rhino. The weapon skidded on the rough body of the unknown being and slipped as if it had hit a certain very solid material. I could notice that his hands were like 4 sharpened claws which tried to grab me. Meanwhile, my collaborator Jose Ponce came down by the small door on the right side of the van and moved towards the spherical ball when, arriving from the right slope of the First Avenue of Bella Vista, a hairy hombrecillo quickly climbed the slope of the hill with joined hands and carrying a lump of earth. So after the beings shot this beam of light at Gustavo, returned to the craft and departed, Gustavo rushed to the police, joining his friend Jose Ponce, and they both reported what happened. Both were at first disbelieved, but it soon became clear that the men were telling the truth. Both were clearly very afraid and traumatized. Gustavo had a long red scratch on his torso where he had grappled with this figure, and later his employer Antonio Cherchi vouched for Gustavo's character and said, "He has been on this job for more than a year. He handles about 1,000 items a day in money and always keeps his accounts in order." So when news of this encounter began to spread, many other people in the area revealed that they had seen a UFO in that area at that time. For example, Maria Antonieta Avellaneda, who lived nearby, says she was woken up around 1 or 2 a.m. by a loud explosive sound followed by a weird whistling noise. 3 other people were in their backyard in Petare that evening when they saw a disc-shaped object flashing different colors moving in the sky for several minutes. Another witness was Concepcion Garachan, and she said that around midnight she and others watched a silent glowing object move over the city, and that around 2 a.m. she heard an explosive sound coming from the Bella Vista Street area. Other witnesses include the Calabozo family. They live in downtown Petare. They said they saw a brilliant light, quote, like a very intense star, which moved overhead around 2 a.m. An amazing witness was Dr. Julio Garces, who was driving his car near Bella Vista Street around 2 and heard a man cry out in terror. He stopped and looked around, but seeing nothing, continued on his way. There were many other witnesses. Manuel Maria Soria said he was driving home around 2:30 a.m., very close to Bella Vista Street, when a powerful light shone down on his car from above, accompanied by a loud whistling sound. He raced home and told his mother, who confirmed that she also heard the strange sound. Another witness was Francisco Leal and actually several other residents on nearby 7th Street. They said they saw intense lights and heard strange noises and actually called the police about it. The police confirmed this. They said that they had received several calls about strange explosive sounds and unusual lights in the sky, and that they actually sent out a patrol to look for it. Now here comes an amazing witness. One of the doctors who later treated Gonzalez said that when he was returning home from a night call on that evening, he said that he witnessed the entire incident. He was actually driving behind Gustavo Gonzalez and Jose Ponce and saw this object blocking the street. He watched everything happen, including the physical altercation between these hairy humanoids and the witnesses. At first he refused to come forward for fear of ridicule, but after being promised anonymity, he agreed to give a statement to the police. Many witnesses were later interrogated by the Venezuelan government, who showed great interest in their case, and because of the many witnesses, this case became very widely publicized. Now, Jim and Coral Lorenzen of APRO were instrumental in documenting these events and later events. They had recently begun to work with Horace Gonzalez Gantome of General Motors Venezuela, who was on the scene. And regarding this case, he wrote, quote, "This case, I can tell you, has taken the country by storm. There is expectancy in the air. The people have been jolted, seriously. There is no indication of panic, but one can feel from the commentaries and conversations that people are waking up." Another APRO correspondent, known only as Joe, wrote to Jim and Coral Lorenzen, and as he says, "Coral, what these 2 men saw on the morning of November 28 was true. There can be no hoax or phoniness in this. All the men are being interrogated and questioned by government departments as to prove what they saw was real. My father went this morning to the inspectory in Petare, and he talked to the men who saw the 2 yesterday morning. He says everything is true, and so do all the officers." Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of the wave. How crazy is that? If it had just been these 2 men alone who had reported something, I think this case would be easy to dismiss. But there was a witness right behind them. People all over town were seeing stuff on that night. It is an undeniable event. And this was the beginning of it all. From this point on, events started occurring on a literally daily basis, sometimes multiple cases per day. So from here, I'm going to give you a day-by-day accounting of the many sightings and landings and humanoid reports. And sometimes it's not just one case per day, but numerous cases per day. So this is really a very, very intense wave of activity. It was 6 a.m., November 28. This is only 4 hours after this amazing incident on Bella Vista Street. At 6 a.m., a group of peasants were sowing their fields in Palmerito, this is south of Maracaibo Lake in Merida, when, without warning, a strange globe-shaped object appeared, landed, and they said they saw several little men exit this craft. These short figures began to pick up samples from the ground. This activity continued for just a few minutes, when the beings climbed back aboard the globe-shaped craft, which immediately took off vertically and was gone. Authorities were notified, who sent a special group to investigate. Nothing else is known about this case, but yeah, the real activity was about to begin in earnest. On that same day, at around 10:11 p.m., there was this amazing case involving a glowing globe, which was seen over the Avila Mountains at what is called the Chair of Caracas. It was just 16 hours after this other incident when Professor Boris Bosio, a good witness, the author of many textbooks on mathematics, was out in his yard in Caracas, which overlooks the Avila Mountains and this famous summit known as the Chair of Caracas, and he was amazed to see a huge, quote, luminous globe. This was hovering directly to the right of the chair. He went inside and alerted his wife, and together they stepped out onto the terrace, and he asked her, "What do you see?" And her response was, quote, "A gigantic thing that emits luminous rays right of the mountain at its level, but without touching the ground, that is like suspended, hanging in space." So they watched it for about 10 minutes until it seemed to fade away. The next morning he was at the store and overheard two men talking about this object, and one described it, saying, quote, "It was an enormous thing, like a giant globe suspended in the air." Returning home after work that evening, he learned that people all over the area had observed it, including his gardener. Some said that they saw it rise up vertically, where it disappeared into the distance. Now, the next case occurred that same evening, November 28, 1954, when this saucer apparently landed in the middle of Borburata town. Efrain Olivaria, who lives with his family in Borburata, about 100 miles to the west of Caracas, had trouble sleeping and decided to take a walk outside, when to his amazement, he saw a giant flying saucer hovering just a few feet in the air right in the center of town. So he immediately ran around town screaming, waking people up, and they came rushing out of their homes to view this object. As it stayed there, some went over to the house of the prefect of the town to wake him up. Unfortunately, by the time he came out, the object had departed. But apparently, quite a few people saw this. One day later, November 29, was the next morning as Captain Luis Felipe Toro and his co-pilot Eduardo Shaquin were approaching Caracas in a TACA airline when they both observed an unknown object zoom across the sky. This was at about 15,000 feet of altitude, and as it passed over the plane, it sped from east to west in mere seconds before vanishing into the distance. There was quite a few pilot encounters because it was the very next day there was another. This account comes from student pilot Saul Paez Paredes of the Air Club of Maracaibo. He was flying at 10,000 feet between Mini Grande and Lagunitas when a bright-colored, quote, flying saucer or something much like it, passed by his plane at fantastic speed, so close it left behind, quote, a gust of wind, which affected the stability of his plane. He said that this object was round and, quote, spinning like a top, and as it passed, he actually momentarily lost control of his plane and had to regain the steering due to this strong gust of wind. As he says, "I was forced to reduce the speed." He landed shortly later and shared his account with reporters. So those are the cases from November of 1954. And this is just the beginning, because from this point on, everybody in Venezuela was seeing UFOs. Not just in Caracas, which seemed to be the center of activity, but all over the country. And it wasn't just ordinary citizens seeing these things. It was people from all walks of life. So it's very apparent that something really intense is going on here. Why exactly these waves occur is still a matter of some mystery and controversy. Could be that they're just putting on a display. Could be they're trying to send a message. Maybe they're investigating this country for some reason. I'm going to try and tie it into some world events towards the end of this episode. But now let's just move on to this very intense wave that absolutely escalated sharply beginning in December. The very next day, December 1st, the UFOs were back. On that day, Father Jesus Hernandez Chapalin, a Catholic priest, said he viewed a luminous disk. And it was just a few hours later, again, witnesses at Borburata said that they saw a glowing object hovering at very low level, very close to the ground. 2 days later, there was another sighting over the Avila Mountains and the chair of Caracas. It was somewhere between 5 and 7 a.m. December 3rd. It was a foggy morning when numerous people in Caracas looked up at the Avila Mountains near the chair of Caracas and saw a, quote, luminous apparatus. They said it was flying at great speed. One of the witnesses, Mr. Bartolomeo, told reporters that he and all of his workers at a farm observed this brilliant, round, shiny object near the east peak of the mountain. Turned out just a short distance to the south at El Hatillo, workers also observed these objects. 1 day later, December 4, the Bishop of Zulio actually saw a flying saucer. This is a man of very high standing, so his report deserves to be taken seriously. He is Monsignor Marcos Sergio Godoy, the Bishop of the Diocese of Zulia, says that he was out for a walk on that evening when he saw a, quote, strange luminous object. He said it cruised slowly across the sky, far too slow to be a meteor, and he says he was also contacted by a teacher who said that they saw a strange object speeding through the sky just a little earlier. So when a reporter asked the bishop if he thought he saw a flying saucer, the bishop replied, I can't assure you it was. It can be. Everything is possible. God might have made another world. Sometime in the first week of December, we're not sure what day this was, but it was near the town of Guanare. Early December, a respected and well-known and well-liked teacher, he was the director of a school in Barquisimeto. He said that one evening he was driving along a highway towards Guanare when he saw a glowing object, which he at first assumed was the moon. So he paid no attention to it until he realized that this object was of course not the moon and was actually moving towards him and was huge in size. When this object began to maneuver above his car and pace his vehicle, he grabbed a small revolver that he keeps in his car and he fired at the object. He said the bullets seemed to have no effect on the craft. Now, thoroughly frightened, he accelerated away at high speed, leaving this object behind him. A short time later, he managed to flag down a car heading in the opposite direction, and this car was occupied by a lawyer, a sheriff, and a policeman. So he persuaded them to follow him back to where he had last seen this object, and they all arrived just in time to see the object heading off into the southern sky, leaving a bluish trail behind it. Here's a case which occurred 1 day later on December 5 at Maquisha. Per the Venezuelan newspapers La Esfera, a radio operator at Pan American Airways at the Maquisha airport told reporters that the airport had allegedly intercepted radio signals that they believed were not from any terrestrial source. Radio operator Chief Carlos Gonzalez Alvarez of Pan Am told newspaper reporters that the messages are being sent to Fort Worth, Texas in the United States with the aim to decipher them according to international codes. He said that the mysterious signals were caught by other airliners as well and were initially believed to be coming from amateur radio operators, but now they are seriously considering the possibility that they come from, quote, Martians. Remember, at this time, the idea of Martians being the cause of extraterrestrials was seriously considered. 1 day later, 3 a.m., December 6, now in San Cristobal in Táchira, Luis Barrios, a humble fruit vendor, enthralled a group of people and reporters when he shared his very early morning sighting of a UFO. Again, it was about 3 a.m., he said. He always gets up early to go to the market, and he was at the corner of 9th Street and Pasig Arismendi. And as Luis says, and I quote, "I had walked a little while, and then suddenly a very bright light illuminated the street as if it were daytime. It looked like noon when the sun is high. I looked up to the sky and saw two elongated meteors. The first one stopped suddenly and then circled above twice and then joined the other, which had continued its path straightforwardly. My legs started to quiver, and I screamed, 'My God!' So at that point, he was approached by another gentleman, Julio Cesar Sosa, who had a shoe repair shop on 5th Street, and he said he saw the same thing. In fact, together they watched the object depart. Now, Julio was also interviewed by reporters, and as Julio says, "Besieged by the heat, I went out to the street and walked several blocks. Suddenly, the whole sky was lit up as with a strong sun. When I looked up, I saw two long things cruising at great speed, north to south. The one in the second place turned around itself several times and then continued on its path. I was very much impressed. I was lucky enough to meet another person, Luis Barrios, who had seen them too, and we both saw the two glowing objects disappear far away among the dense clouds." Here's another case. This was the same day, early in the morning. This case was actually picked up by a news service dispatch and was printed in the New York Daily Mirror newspaper. It involves a very widely viewed UFO sighting in Caracas. And according to the news report, thousands of persons spent the greater part of Tuesday morning watching what most of them claimed was a flying saucer in the skies over the city. Many persons described the object they said they saw as a, quote, luminous sphere in movement. Now, many people reported these objects flying in towards the Avila Mountains, while others said that they saw activity around the La Carlota airport just east of Caracas. One day later, December 7, 1954, in the evening, the police became UFO witnesses. By now, the wave over Venezuela was so intense, particularly in the Caracas area, that officials were beginning to observe the UFOs. The witnesses in this case are police officers Delfin Sayo, Apolinar Sanchez, and Sergeant Tolosa. They reported their observation of 6 glowing star-like objects flying in formation at high speed towards the Avila Mountains. And as one of the officers said, "We saw them get higher and higher and vanish eventually into the distance, unexplainably. Afterwards, the supposed saucers appeared again, this time going southwest in the direction of La Carlota Airdrome, and disappeared towards the distant horizon." They later learned that numerous officials in Chacao also saw the objects, including officers of the police department and Hernan Villamizar, the secretary of the patrol car service. 2 days later, there was another series of events involving landings, zigzagging craft, and of course humanoids. It was December 9 when 2 friends, Miguel Toro and Delio Amado Leon, were near the Radio Caracas control towers when they said they saw a small craft with lights around it coming down to the ground almost for a landing. But no sooner did they see it when it flicked off its lights and took off at high speed and zoomed out of sight. Prior to this, Miguel believed all the reports were the result of hoaxes. Needless to say, he changed his mind and told reporters, "Now I'm ready to believe anything." That very same night, Benjamin Montoya was at the El Pelon rabbit farm in Aguero Felipe Alvarado in the state of Lara when his name was added to the growing list of UFO witnesses. As Benjamin says, "I saw it for several minutes as it went off its route, zigzagging behind a village called Petare, but some unexpected obstacle perhaps forced it to land at Carora." Around this same time, a group of witnesses in Chacao, this is a suburb of Caracas, said that a craft not only hovered overhead, but reportedly humanoids emerged from the craft, and people even approached the beings and tried to touch them. One first-hand report comes from Tomas Betancourt, who says he grabbed one of the, quote, Martians, and as he says, He was gelatinous and very slippery and got out of my hands. Next day, December 10, 6:30 p.m., now in La Floresta, early in the day, a witness had observed 5 objects in El Tigre and reportedly captured a photograph of them. But at 6:30 p.m. on December 5th, a well-known doctor was driving with his father along La Floresta and Francisco do Miranda Avenue, and the doctor's father pointed to the side of the road and shouted out, "Look!" So the doctor stopped the car, looked out, and they both saw 2 little men running into the thick brush alongside the road, where they promptly disappeared. Moments later, a glowing disc-shaped object rose from the area. They said it made a weird, quote, sizzling sound, and the object proceeded to dart off at high speed. Now, previous to this incident, the doctor had not believed in UFOs or extraterrestrials, but following the incident, he said he was a believer. That same evening, another woman in Caracas said that she saw 5 luminous, disc-shaped craft fly directly over her home. At Maracaibo, this is in the evening, a UFO interrupted a domino match between 2 men. At this point, activity was so intense, many people were spending their time outside in the evening in hopes of viewing activity. So yeah, around 10 p.m., 2 men, Petare Tudares and Reynaldo Afencio, were playing dominoes at the Shoreline Walk in the Republic Square, where many people, other students, were studying and people were just hanging out. Suddenly, a hat-shaped object appeared over the water and hovered above the surface, emitting lights. And as Reynaldo says, it was triangular-shaped. We didn't hear any strange noise. It was stationary for some minutes and then disappeared without leaving any trail. What we saw was seen also by many boys who were studying at the square. Also on that same evening, a formation of objects described as turtle-shaped moved over El Tigre. Reportedly, an American petroleum engineer was able to snap a photograph, which he took to authorities who were very interested in it, but apparently this photograph was never published. It must have been something else to be in Venezuela at that time and watching all this activity. People were losing their minds. And it's very much exactly what happened in France just 1 month earlier. So that is just so amazing to me. And now an event was going to occur to 2 young men involving humanoids that really brought this whole series of events to a amazing fever pitch again. I've used that word before. But it's just amazing to think about how many people were having these kinds of encounters. And I am pretty sure that most of the people who experienced these events did not come forward because, as we see, their government was not particularly receptive to people reporting these events. But yeah, this next event, I really feel for these 2 witnesses because this is an incredible encounter. Now, on the same evening as the above cases, December 10, 2 teenage boys, Lorenzo Flores and Jesus Gomez, both age 15, had gone rabbit hunting near Carora, not far from the Trans-Andean Highway between Chico and Serra de las Tres Torres. They had used up all of their bullets and were bicycling home along the highway when they saw something shiny and metallic in the brush a short distance from the highway. So their first thought was that a car had driven off the road and they went to investigate. But coming up to it, they found themselves only a few feet away from an apparent flying saucer. They described it as shaped like 2 bowls placed rim to rim. They said it was about 10 feet wide and hovering about 3 feet above the ground, and it looked like the bottom was really hot, ejecting flames. They also saw what looked like a sort of, quote, aerial antenna on the upper part of the saucer. And they said that this object was sending out flashes of light so brilliant that they were lighting up the area all around it. And I'll just quote Lorenzo Flores directly. As he says, "Then we saw 4 little men come out of it. They were approximately 3 feet tall. When they realized that we were there, the 4 of them grabbed Jesus and tried to drag him towards the thing. I could do nothing but take my shotgun, which was not loaded, and I struck one of them with it. The gun seemed to have struck something as hard as rock. It stung my hands, and it broke the gun in 2 pieces. It was too dark to see the features of their faces, but we did notice the abundant hair on their bodies and great strength. Now Jesus confirms this. He remembers going off the road and seeing this craft, and as he says, "Out of curiosity, we went up to it, and to our amazement, we saw two dwarves who ran up to us and grabbed me. Flores tried to run away, but perhaps out of a feeling of self-respect and of our comradeship, he rushed up to the group who were holding me prisoner, and with the shotgun he was holding in his hands, he gave them a blow, and breaking his weapon, since their bodies seemed to be like steel. Although nobody believes us, everything we have said is true. They picked me up to carry me to the vessel." So Jesus at this time fainted, and upon recovering consciousness, he was dazed and disoriented, and it took him a little while to even remember what happened. Lorenzo immediately dragged him back to the road. These 3-foot-tall little hairy humanoids went back to their craft, which promptly took off. Now at the highway, they came upon a truck driver who said that he saw this object take off and that it glowed a green light as it moved away at fast speed. So at this point, they just dropped the gun, everything. They biked as fast as they could to the police station. Arriving there, the police confirmed that Jesus' shirt was torn to shreds. Both boys had deep scratches on their bodies. They were nearly hysterical with fear, and in fact they had to be taken to see doctors. They were examined by a doctor and a psychiatrist who said that there was no physical or mental illness apparent. The next morning, Jesus and Lorenzo led the police to the site of the encounter, and the police found signs of a struggle, and they also found Lorenzo's broken shotgun. Bushes in the area were scorched, and there was a smell like sulfur. Later, Jesus Gomez expressed regret about coming forward and said, quote, "If I had known that because of reporting some strange little animals, I would have to stay at the police station, I wouldn't have said anything. I suffered when the 4 dwarves grabbed me and carried me off to the strange craft. What is happening is that nobody believes us, and we have to spend 2 months in the police station." It was 2 days later there was a very widely viewed sighting, because according to a newspaper account, the citizens of San Antonio at Caracas Gulf were surprised by the appearance of a, quote, "craft with the shape of an illuminated balloon or globe, green in color, which crossed the sky from south to north." This is a simple sighting, but by now the activity was so intense, the citizens and the government of Venezuela were becoming increasingly puzzled and alarmed. 2 days later, there was another humanoid account. This is actually in Buenos Aires, Argentina, but I included it because it involves a humanoid and it was occurring at the same time. There were others in Brazil, by the way, as well. But the witness in this case is Enrique Zaba of Coronel Pringles near Buenos Aires, who says that on the morning of December 14, he was going to work when he saw a disc-shaped or cigar-shaped object making large circles in the sky and casting down a brilliant beam of light, when suddenly the craft dropped down to about 3 feet above the ground, and now, in the central part of the craft, Enrique could see a short humanoid. He said it remained for only a few moments when the craft immediately shot back up into the sky and disappeared off to the north. But that same day, there was another amazing incident in Calabozo, actually next to a movie theater. It was 9 p.m. as numerous people over Calabozo saw this glowing craft that was remaining in the sky for quite some time. In fact, it was long enough that people started alerting others, and everyone in a movie theater rushed out to watch this craft. Per the newspaper accounts on this, pretty much everyone in the town saw this object as it was moving very slowly from north to south, leaving a thick trail of red light long after the object had vanished. The object was described as, quote, "a strange, eerie-looking apparatus, lighted green and yellow and going fast." In fact, one man said his daughter fainted upon seeing the object. Now here's another case the same day. This one is really bizarre because according to the eyewitness accounts, they saw what appears to be a little ET entering into a hotel. This was again December 14th. This one took place at Ciudad Bolivar, and this has to be the most bizarre encounter of the entire wave. It was around 10 p.m. 3 disc-shaped craft were seen by multiple witnesses over the city. The objects reportedly emitted brilliant light and moved silently at such fantastic speed that close observation proved to be impossible. Two of the first-hand witnesses were Crisanto Muniz and Antonio Jose Briceño. And Antonio says of the UFOs, "They were at a considerable height, yet we could see their features. They were like a disc." Now on this night, multiple witnesses reported that, quote, "a strange being of little size was seen entering the Embassy Hotel, or the Hotel Embajada, according to a newspaper article, and I quote, those who saw it state that by no means was it a human being. It was a Martian. Its monster-like form and little size proved it. This is one of the first news about saucers and Martians here in the state of Bolivar, and it caused great excitement." The very next day, there was an incredible sighting where a UFO landed next to somebody's home. This was in Bachaquero. It's a very convincing sighting which occurred early in the morning hours of December 15, when many people near Bachaquero saw a brilliant craft which alerted everyone to its presence because it was emitting blinding flashes of blue light. One witness was Fred Smith of Shell Caribbean Petroleum. He said that he was awakened in his home when the bluish light shone in through his windows, filling the room with light. He got up and looked out the window, and he said he saw a giant, flat-shaped craft hovering stationary over a nearby hill. As he says, "I was dumbfounded, so I just turned down the blinds. Nothing living could be seen. It was impossible not to notice it, since the blue light from the craft was so very strong." Now, not wanting to alarm his wife, he just went back to bed, but as he says, "The next morning I investigated the hillock for any traces of the saucer, but found nothing." There were two other witnesses, a pharmacist by the name of El Estrada and a grocery store owner, Manuel Piferua, who said that they also saw the saucer at the same time. And it was that same day, midday, in San Lorenzo, Venezuela, that thousands saw a fleet of objects. It was around 2:20 p.m. People in San Lorenzo, all over town, saw this fleet of UFOs. As the news report reads, nearly 1,000 persons state that they had seen a fleet of flying saucers in the skies over the Duralt district of Zulia State. Among them were school students, several teachers, and many farmers. At 2:20 in the afternoon, the whole town and many people in the oil fields, including 400 students from a college here, went out to observe some strange craft that whirled in the sky. Two of the boys fainted from excitement. One of the teachers was able to draw the craft on paper. Francisco Olivare, a farmer who lived not far from Mare Grande, beside the highway leading to this city, stated to us that he and his wife had seen several large birds fall dead while flying in the area of the saucers. There you go, day by day, sightings, landings, humanoid encounters. It's absolutely insane, especially that case where people reported an alleged ET walking into a hotel. Don't know what to think about that case. There's really not a lot of information about it, but it just goes to show how truly intense this wave was and how it was affecting people. And now we move to another humanoid encounter. This was the absolute peak of this UFO wave, mid-December, December 15. And this was another amazing humanoid encounter involving these hairy dwarves, these little tiny hairy humanoids. It's very strange because this is certainly not the type of humanoid we see so often all over the world. They do turn up, absolutely. But this particular wave seemed to have quite a few of these hairy humanoids for whatever reason. But yeah, this next case is just wow. Again, on December 15, this is the same night that thousands of people saw UFOs over San Lorenzo and a craft landed at Bachaquero. On December 15, there was an incident over San Carlos del Zulia where a man was attacked by a hairy humanoid. 3 young men had gone to dinner and were driving home. They were near the exposition park of the Ministry of Agriculture when one of the men, Jesus Paz, asked the driver to stop the car so he could relieve his bladder alongside the highway. So he crept into an isolated area of the park. He took about 12 steps and had just walked around a tall bed of flowers when he saw a short, hairy humanoid examining the flowers. So he screamed and turned to run, and this alerted the creature to his presence, who immediately attacked him, clawing and tearing at his shirt, and then delivering a blow to the back of Jesus' neck, stunning him. Now his friends heard Jesus scream and went running to help, and they found him lying on the ground, stunned and unconscious. They both also saw this hairy humanoid, who was now running towards a shiny, metallic, disc-shaped craft sitting on or hovering just above the ground. One of the friends, Luis Mejia, he's a member of the National Guard. He picked up a rock and hurled it at the disc. By this time the disc was already rising. It made a loud buzzing sound as it rose upwards and darted away. Jesus' friends immediately rushed him to the hospital. He was in shock and had long, deep scratches like claw marks on his right side and down across his spine. One day later, another amazing sighting in Caracas. It was around 11 a.m. December 16. The witness, Manolo Tirado, said he saw this silvery object remain in place for more than a half an hour. It then suddenly increased in luminosity, moved slightly downwards, remained in place for another 10 minutes, then soared upwards into the sky and disappeared. Reportedly, most of the people outside at that time were also able to see the object. And later that night, again December 16, but now in Ciudad Bolivar, citizens of the city saw a, quote, luminous circle pass over the city at very low elevation. They said it moved at moderate speed, leaving behind a trail of green light, and was lost to sight over the hills surrounding the city. And according to the newspaper report on the sighting, quote, everyone was alarmed by the incident. The very next day, there was a sighting from an airplane over Puerto Piritu. On December 17, 1954, the crew and passengers of LAV Airlines were flying over the area when they saw three glowing objects, which they said were shaped like a tortoise, flying in a leading triangle formation at tremendous speed. According to them, the objects were shooting off very luminous rays. Two of the passengers identified themselves as Rafael Boada, a respected businessman, and Carlos Molejas, an engineer. And per the news story, quote, the report caused excitement and curiosity among the citizens of Puerto Piritu. There you go. Every day, case after case, sightings, landings, humanoids. The intensity of this wave is absolutely astonishing. And the Venezuelan government, I can only imagine how difficult this must have been for them. And the cases I'm reporting here are just the tip of the iceberg, because we know that most people don't report their encounters, and I'm absolutely certain that in this particular wave, most people were not reporting it. Because again, the Venezuelan government was not particularly receptive to people reporting their encounters. So it wouldn't surprise me if you could times the number of cases I'm presenting here by at least 10, or probably more accurately, 100. So let's continue, because this next case is also a very famous humanoid encounter, and once again involving these hairy humanoids. Here's another case involving a hairy humanoid. This one took place in Valencia on December 19, 1954. It was around 11 p.m. The witness was a teenager, Jose Parra. He was a jockey, and he was jogging along a highway between Caracas and Valencia near a cement factory when he says he saw about 6, quote, hairy little men. They were standing next to a disc-shaped craft, hovering a few feet above the ground. They were collecting large rocks and boulders and putting them into the ship. Both amazed and terrified, Jose turned to run, but at that moment the little men noticed him, and one of them shot him with a violet-colored ray of light. Jose said he was unable to move until these little men re-entered the craft, which moved away and out of sight. And now freed from paralysis, he rushed directly to the police station, and Senor Lopez Ayala, the Commissioner of Criminal Investigations for the city of Valencia, was at his desk when he saw Jose Parra come running in, terrified, breathless, into the station. In fact, it took Jose a few minutes to calm down enough to share what had happened to him. So they dispatched detectives immediately to the site, where they found strange, unidentifiable marks, apparently footprints, on the ground, but of course no saucer or little men. However, investigators did learn that on that same night, around midnight, an employee at the nearby Borburata Sanatorium for those suffering from tuberculosis looked out the window and saw a glowing disc-shaped object floating very close to the ground. Fearing to upset the patients, the first witness said nothing, but later at 3:15 a.m., another hospital employee saw what was apparently the same object still hovering just a few feet above the ground. He went outside to approach the craft, and it quickly darted away. The next day, there was more UFOs over various cities. For example, numerous people saw a flying disc near kilometer 23 on Route 90 near Piedras Coloradas. Some witnesses reported the object as being metallic, very large, blindingly brilliant, and coming as low as 2,500 feet of altitude. After a short display, it took off at great velocity to the south. Another sighting on the same day provides an important insight. As the press report reads, "The most impressive news of the flying saucer affair lately is this one, which authorities reported to us. It happened on the roadway to Turin. It involved an important employee of the Ministry of National Education and many other persons who drove by at that time. Seemingly, the strange airship came down as though it intentionally meant to be observed by all. It was stated that the airship emitted luminosity from its edges and stood stationary for several minutes, apparently watching the cars passing by on the roadway. It then zoomed upwards until it was out of sight. The names of the witnesses to this strange incident have been kept secret as the present situation demands it." So yeah, I found that interesting that they say that as though this craft was intentionally meant to be observed. So that points towards this being a sort of display. One final case for December 20th occurred in Caracas, and as the news report reads, "The peaceful town of Caracas in the state of Miranda was surprised again by the passing of two flying saucers. Last Monday, a party of picnickers observed one of these flying machines cruise by. The witness this time is a very well-known and reliable person, the businessman and importer Frank Petare, owner of the Petare and C-squared car sellers. Mr. Petare sighted two strange airships or flying saucers maneuvering over the near town of Caracas and then observed how they stopped for several seconds over the nearby mountains. After that, the objects raced across the sky at great speed towards Los Teques, following the course of the highway leading to town. Short time later, 3 days later, on December 23rd at 5:30 a.m., members of the Berenician High Society came out of early morning pre-Christmas church services and saw what they described as a fleet of flying objects. Among the witnesses were a prefect, a police officer, a telegraph operator, and many others. The objects were described as, quote, round-shaped with a short cap on the upper surface. Some counted 6 objects, and some said that there was as many as 12. 2 days later, another sighting, and this one involved at least 100 witnesses. This is the final reported sighting of the year, a half an hour before midnight, when 3 officers of the National Identification Service and 1 traffic inspector, and apparently hundreds of other people, saw a glowing object zoom across the sky above Puerto Ayacucho. People came rushing out of their homes to observe this phenomenon when, as the press report says, it became more astounding when flying at low altitude and giving off light, there appeared an object which looked like the full moon, but brighter, and surrounded by another, smaller, similar one. At intervals of 5 minutes, there appeared other objects, 4 in number, which made a circle over the city and then disappeared towards the north. A half hour later, Mr. Feline Argote, his wife and roommate, watched several luminous flying objects overhead. Prior to the sighting, Feline was a vocal skeptic of the reports, but afterwards he, quote, now believes in these things, connected perhaps with Martians. By the end of December, activity seemed to just start to trickle off. The end of the wave had come. There were a few other sightings, and I'll cover them. But for whatever reason, December was the focus of all this activity. And the question why is still unanswered. I personally think that UFO waves are kind of a publicity campaign by the ETs. They're announcing their presence. Again, they're doing this all over the planet. But yeah, the end of December kind of marked the end of this very intense wave, with just a few other sightings through January and in the months beyond. And I think it's important to cover these because it's definitely a part of the wave. But yeah, that's the Venezuelan UFO wave. Let's just cover a few more sightings and we'll get to the conclusion of this absolutely astonishing series of events. The wave now came to a gradual end with only a few more sightings. I'll just list them very quickly. January 1st, 1955, daytime. Numerous people in Maturin saw a glowing star-like object which remained in the sky for 1 hour, alternately appearing and disappearing before moving upwards at great speed. But that same day, residents of the Los Chorros area in Caracas saw an object moving sideways, making turns, darting at different angles for about 15 minutes before disappearing upwards at great speed. And reportedly, birds in the area were frightened by the presence of these objects. 3 days later, January 4th, 2 a.m., numerous residents observed an object flying up and down and then hovering for several minutes near the dam in Barquisimeto. And as one witness says, "We saw it as we were fixing our car in the road." Now I'm certainly sure that flying saucers exist, as I have seen one. 1 day later, January 5, 8 p.m., a family driving east of Caracas saw a red glowing sphere hanging in the sky near the Avila Mountains. 1 month later, February 10, again in Caracas, a huge disc with 2 bright blue lights, quote, like 2 huge luminous eyes scrutinizing the city, moved across the sky. You can see a drawing of it. This was seen by many people for about 6 to 8 minutes, and it shone down brilliant beams of light onto the ground, and one lady reportedly collapsed from fright at the sight of these objects. 1 month later, another sighting at Barquisimeto. A violet-colored, round glowing object with a red light darted back and forth over the sky, then moved to the town of Corora, where it was seen by the residents of that town. And one final sighting. Around 10:30 a.m. on March 22nd, numerous people in Medanito and Las Camadas were overwhelmed by a sudden, quote, deafening buzzing noise. In fact, it was so loud that it caused people's homes to shake. But weirdly, nothing was visible in the sky, so technically not a sighting, though those who were there and experienced this did believe a flying saucer must be responsible. So that's the UFO wave in Venezuela of 1954. And I think it's impossible to deny that something very profound was happening there, particularly in December. At the peak of the wave, around December 14 and 15, the Brazilian Air Force made a public announcement calling for a, quote, united world effort, asking that the nations of the world band together to study the UFO problem. So Brazil was definitely aware of what was going on. In fact, leading this call was Brazilian Colonel João Adil Oliveira. This was widely published in the Brazilian press, which only added to the excitement of the public of what was going on again in Venezuela. Now, some of the UFO witnesses reported having been very badly treated by the military police after going public with their sightings. In a letter to Coral Lorenzen, one of their correspondents wrote, and I quote, "Coral, up to now, none of the reports of having seen or being attacked by little men have been denied. Besides, notice that in many of these sightings, members of the national security have been witness to them. Coral, everybody here is afraid of national security because when they nab a fellow, they do not behave very decently with him. A friend of mine once said to a National Guardsman, fitted with anger, that, quote, what kind of government is this one? And then he was taken to the national security as a, quote, subversive to the government. And being only a boy 19 years old, he was tortured and forced to confess that he was acting against the government. He denied it and he was beaten. After being detained for a week in jail, by the stress and works of his mother he was released. You see, they are sort of detectives, and they treat people not very good, especially when it is because of politics. Did you know that they tried to silence the 2 boys, meaning Lorenzo Flores and Jesus Gomez, who had a physical altercation with the humanoids? But as the correspondent says, But the boys kept telling the truth in spite of the threats made by national security. So you see, Coral, one can't just make up a false story out of anything here. Coral, please, this is very confidential. As you know, here nobody can talk about any of these things openly. It is better to shut up. I don't mean our actual government is bad. No, nothing of the sort. On the other hand, it is up to now the most progressive one, not only in Venezuela, but in all South America. But you see, our people are not like the good educated American people. Here, if there were freedom that is found in the US, things would be pretty rough, and revolutions and riots would take place every day. So it is better to curtail and shorten the freedoms here. So another correspondent wrote, there is growing belief in Venezuela that the UFO, or platillo volador, is of extraterrestrial origin. I have spoken to doctors, clergymen, engineers, newspapermen, intellectuals, and the man on the street, and the majority of them can see no other explanation but the interplanetary one. Those who scoff have not taken the trouble to study the matter and the hundreds of cases reported by persons of repute and professional standing. Horacio Gonzalez of Caracas writes, quote, there is something on Earth which has obliged them, the UFOs, to visit in such numbers. We are up against a problem of tremendous importance, and no resource known or facet of human ingenuity should be left unexplored to see that this problem be handled right away, and with the seriousness and attention it merits. Now during this wave, or right after it, 3 American scientists visited Caracas and were interviewed by reporters regarding these encounters with the hairy humanoids that had appeared in at least half a dozen Venezuelan cities. One of them was Cornell professor Dr. H. Cross Sabine, and he said to the reporters, if they are not the experiments of any nation on Earth, then they must come from some other planet. Another unnamed physical science professor, allegedly from the University of Michigan, told reporters, we cannot disbelieve what has been said about the flying saucers. Atomic explosions may be the motive for the strange visits. And finally, Dr. Henry Wilson of the University of Pennsylvania told reporters, saucers are not the result of imagination or psychosis, but are spaceships manned by beings from the planet Mars. So there you go. That's the Venezuelan UFO wave of 1954. The 40 cases I've covered, again, just the tip of the iceberg. We know there are hundreds. There are literally hundreds of thousands of witnesses, most likely. And I am guessing that people who encountered humanoids were very unlikely to come forward, simply because look how the ones who did come forward suffered as a result. It's such a shame because they first go through this somewhat traumatic event in a number of these cases, and then have to go through the additional trauma of not being believed or even ridiculed and gaslit and so forth. It's really, really a shame. But again, the question is, why Venezuela? Why 1954? These are questions that are really hard to answer because we can only speculate. Venezuela at that time was a very wealthy country. One of the wealthiest in South America, actually. This was a time where some interesting world events were going on as well. There was the H-bomb test at Bikini Atoll. The first Russian atomic station had been built. We also launched the USS Nautilus, the first US nuclear submarine. Around that time, France was having an intense UFO wave, which may be connected to the whole CERN establishment, and there are, of course, some indications that we may have discovered anti-gravity at that time. So I don't know. Again, these are all speculations. But there has to be a reason for this very intense wave. I will say that I think most countries have had a wave like this at one point or another. Some have slid under the radar and were not publicized. But if you look into the history of UFO encounters, you will see these very intense waves popping up every 5 or 10 years somewhere on this planet. And I guess it was Venezuela's turn. So there you go, a truly amazing series of events. Why all the hairy humanoids? I don't know. If you have the answer to that question, I'd love to hear it. But I think it's an important wave that definitely deserves to be known by all humanity, and that's why I did this episode. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth, and most important of all, keep having fun. And I'm signing off for now. See you next time on UFOs and the Paranormal.